So let's get started if we can. Want to thank you all for joining us here for our afternoon segment. And we are going to talk during this panel about what happens when FRAND fails implementing a global SEP litigation strategy. So what we will largely assume, although, I mean, I suppose if you guys want to talk about validity, we can, or we can just assume that, okay, the patents are valid here. That's fine. There are SEP patents because at some point these portfolios are so large that there will be, somebody's got one. I mean, it's the old way IBM used to license is, you know, you need a license in my portfolio. Well, how do I know that do you really want us to go through our whole portfolio and find the ones that you infringe? Because that's a different rate. It's, you know, sort
you
of.
Only need one.
Yeah. So you'll need to license something. Something will wind up being valid. And FRAND has now failed. So what do we do? And I think increasingly that has been looking outside the U.S., and we'll have that conversation. Let me introduce the panelists. We can go from the audience's left to right. We have Volkmar Henke, and he is a patent litigator from Barheidel-Pagenburg and is active in the areas of mobile communication, semiconductor technology, circuit design, data compression, video and audio coding, and electrical engineering. Thank you for joining us, Volkmar. Then next to him we have Otto Lix. And last night at dinner I asked Otto whether there were any other law firms in Brazil. It seems that Otto has cornered the market on Brazil. He's a founding partner at Lix Attorneys, which has over 300 people among 5 offices, including in Brazil and Japan, as well as he has a French desk and a German desk as well. So thank you again for being here with us today, Otto. Next to Otto is a man who needs really no introduction. I'll give him a brief introduction like I told Dave Kapos and Judge Michelle yesterday. When you need just one phrase to introduce you, you know you've reached the pinnacle of the industry. And Judge Rader is a former chief judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. And he's been a great friend of ours for a number of years. We really appreciate you being here, Your Honor.
Thank you, Gene.
He's taught patent law literally all over the world to U.S. students. He's gone and lectured in China and Japan and all throughout Asia and many other countries as well. Thank you for being here, Your Honor.
Thank you, Gene.
And then last but certainly not least is my friend Carlos Olarte, who joins us, and he is the co-founder of Olarte Moore, and he has, I probably should ask you if you're the only law firm in Colombia. You've really kind of cornered the market as far as I can tell. Certainly in the IP sector, you have 5 offices across Colombia, and you have an Asia desk in Tokyo as well. He does, like Otto, SEP work. He does pharmaceutical litigation, and these two are tag team. You have a lot of the same clients. You do a lot of the same work. And
I have an important question.
Yep.
Have you ever sued Carlos, Otto? I want to know who won.
Yeah. So we really have an all-star panel here to talk about these issues. And what I'll do is I'll kick it across them. Normally I go in the order in which I introduce, but I think I'll call an audible and let Judge Rader start us off here today. Judge, when you hear the topic about implementing a global strategy, I guess implicitly that means we're not counting the U.S. We'll have an ITC panel later on. But things aren't great in the U.S., and you really do sort of need to look outside the U.S., I suppose. But what say you?
In a couple sentences, I'm often asked to give some kind of international litigation strategy, and I will always tell them they must file a case in the U.S. because that's where you want to settle under U.S. damages law. But you never want to litigate in the U.S. There are too many obstacles there, and indeed, maybe the best bargain is right here in the room with Otto and Carlos. But Germany is also an important part of that that strategy.
Yeah, and this panel was not put together happenstance for that reason. I mean, we have Germany, Brazil, and Colombia, and Otto, I'll go to you next. Brazil is I think you've said the fifth largest telecommunications market in the world, and you can get an injunction. Not you can get an injunction. You have gotten injunctions, right? So what do you tell folks about why they should look at Brazil as a part of their global SEP strategy?
Well, Jim, Brazil, for its size, it's certainly a jurisdiction where you have a lot of implementation of the global technologies that we see implemented in standards and protected in patent portfolios throughout the world. But as the fifth largest telecom market, Brazil is also the third largest producer, just behind China and India. Brazil produces much more smartphones than the US and Europe combined. Brazil is the second largest market for OTT, just behind the US. Streaming those different codecs. And it is a jurisdiction where, I have to say, has implemented what you used to have in this country up to the 90s. I have to say it's an honor to be here with Judge Rader, one of my mentors. It allowed me to be to see his work at his chambers when I was in Washington, D.C. And what we have nowadays is basically the system that we learned from the CAFC in the 90s, from the U.S. PTO in the 90s, from the U.S. leadership that we've seen throughout so many years. So in Brazil, we have a system where you can get a preliminary injunction, you can get a permanent injunction, and you can have a settlement in about 20 months from first filing.
And much less expensively than in most countries, right?
We don't have e-discovery. We have no discovery whatsoever. We don't bother a single CEO. We don't have anyone being deposed. It's a paper-based proceeding, and it's very fast. As the judges learn more and more, the judges have been issued PI since GSM in Brazil, so it's not actually that new. Nowadays, we have a group of judges that understand very well that innovation is it needs to be fueled by the royalties of a generation of technology to fund the research on the next generation.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like a lot like what we used to have, Judge. Yeah.
Otto was a very good student.
So Carlos, I'll go to you next, because I know, like Otto, you represented Ericsson, and Otto had the case in Brazil. You had the case in Colombia.
Right.
I believe you were the first brick to fall.
Right.
Right. I mean, and can you? Well, I want you to comment on that, but open-ended. Why should people be using Colombia? Be looking to Colombia as a solution here?
I think we're pretty similar to the situation in Brazil. I think the bigger strategic difference is the size. Obviously, Brazil is much bigger, but we have a similar system in the sense that we can get a preliminary injunction relatively quickly. Another very important element regarding Colombia is validity. Any challenges to validity are going to be held off because we have a system similar to Germany. It's bifurcated, different judge. And in the best of cases, the analysis is going to take place in 2 years. So basically outside the window of the preliminary injunction. We're not going to be what drives a global settlement, but it'll be something to get the parties to sit back down at the table. And I sometimes have a slide when I make a presentation for potential clients to show them, what our position in the world and the global strategy is. And there's this huge big lion, but there's like a little lion cub biting the tail. That's us. We're biting the tail. We're extremely annoying mosquito. In the Apple case, Apple was where we were 0.2% of the global market, but we were just really annoying because we were able to make the you are an efficient infringer argument, right? And that just annoyed them to no end, because reputationally that, they're like, we're selling innovation, and that got to them, and we got, news from different sources that was just really annoying. So it's a good driver for that. And one more thing, and maybe this is also different to Brazil, but it's not applicable to SEP litigation, is we do have discovery available. So for our pharma clients, that's attractive as well, to be able to get discovery in Colombia for multiple different reasons, obviously.
So, and Otto, Apple settled like the day after you got the injunction in Brazil, right, or thereabouts. Yeah. And Carlos, you had an injunction in Colombia a couple months ahead of that.
Right. And
the speed of both of your countries, it seems like it would be an important consideration, because it's probably the first time a judge is actually going to have looked at this, and now it's not just parties arguing, parties saying this, maybe a mediator looking at this, or a facilitator trying to bring parties together. If somebody wearing a black robe said, stop selling in our countries, right. Could you both of you comment on that a little bit? Otto, do you want to go first?
Well, the PI, I think it has multiple impacts. When you have a PI granted, depending on, of course, the case, you're going to disturb ongoing business. You're going to disturb launches of new products. You get small customers upset. You get very large customers upset. In the smartphone business, when you get a preliminary injunction, all the mobile carriers ask, what now? Are we going to have products to sell to clients or not? What about our ongoing contracts? What about the rebates that we give to clients that stay on 4-year contracts? We have multiple ways of getting value out of a decision like that. And it happens that in most of the cases, we don't actually have even to work on the implementation of the PI. Parties settled right after they understand the PI is in place to stay until the end of the case.
Yeah, and that's why eBay not having injunctions here has been so detrimental in the U.S. Right. But Carlos, feel free to say what you like. It's my understanding that Apple and Colombia said, well, it's only 2.2%, we don't need it. And by the way, we'll just take it out of our phones anyway, which they didn't do, correct?
No. One thing, I had a lot of questions from Ericsson saying, but as soon as you get it, that's a prohibition, it's over. It's like, yes, the other side will be crazy to try and stay on the market. And it was very automatic. And one of the things we also requested in our PI was an anti-suit injunction, right, against the preliminary injunction. The first thing Apple did was in Eastern District of Texas, they requested the judge to pay damages that were being generated to Apple for asking them to be blocked in Colombia. And I remember reading the transcript. It was very funny, Judge Gilstrap, because it was an emergency motion too. I think they pulled him out of a fishing trip or something like that.
Oh my God.
And so he was like, the first words were like, Colombia? I was like, and they started something, from Bogota to Waco, they were killing us, Judge. And you could see the frustration, just reading the transcript. And the first question was, are you asking me for an anti-suit injunction? And that just goes to illustrate also the nature of the global strategy around this, because Ericsson had managed to get and actually lost a request for an anti-suit injunction in the Netherlands, right? But the judge in the Netherlands said, you show up with an anti-suit injunction and I'll grant this in the Netherlands. And so Judge Gilstrap asked the Apple attorney, are you asking me for an anti-suit injunction? No, Judge, we're not asking for an anti-suit. We're asking you to pay damages just like you did in the Samsung case, right? The Wuhan, back in December 25th, that whole story. And I think Judge Gilstrap got it pretty quickly. He was like, no, that's not. The Chinese judge was ordering me not to meddle in the U.S. patent case. What's the Colombian judge doing? Oh, he's just saying that no one meddle with his case in Colombia. And he's like, that's fine. What's the problem, right? So that was an interesting aspect of the PI. But I think, and going back to that, we were just being very annoying with the case in Colombia. They didn't pull out. They could have, I mean, like for Apple out of Germany, that sort of thing. They didn't pull out. They just stopped selling. We blocked the launch of the iPhone 14. You could see all the billboards where Apple was just selling their earbuds. It was kind of funny. I remember they thought it was so egregious, from a due process point of view. They filed a personal constitutional action against Ericsson, the judge, me, and the firm. And they didn't need to do this, but I remember them citing the Universal Human Rights Declaration, Article 8. I'm like, that was kind of over the top. Obviously, Florian Mueller, who, by the way, speaks perfect Spanish, picked up on that one and just, he helped me out a lot, so made me famous. But, I mean, just to illustrate how annoying.
I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, I've been sued as the attorney, and I always, when you get sued as the attorney, I always think, okay, well, one, I'm doing my job, and two, they are out of arrows in their quiver, you know, when they're suing the attorney. But so we'll circle back to this. I want to bring Volkmar into this because I saved you for last on purpose because so much, as I understand it, of what's going on in Brazil and in Colombia and in other countries, Netherlands and elsewhere, is really influenced by the successes from the patent owner's perspective. And that's what this panel is about. It's about how do you implement a strategy when the implementer is saying no, how does the innovator implement that strategy? But a lot of the successes from the innovator's perspective stem from Germany having a strong system like you do have.
Yeah. Is this on the mic? Yeah, thank you very much, Gene. Where do I start? Indeed, we have seen intense, I would say, 7 years since Huawei ZTE. And the German courts have been one of the most influencing courts, at least in Europe, for the reception, for the interpretation of the European Court of Justice's Huawei ZTE judgment. If you read that judgment, it is quite short. It seems to establish this, what is also called a ping-pong of obligations. But then, of course, if it comes to specific cases, those cases must be interpreted, must be rightly understood in the sense of Huawei, what the common European law is. And in that regard, really, then the Germans have, the German courts have taken the lead, I would say, in particular with the Siswell-Hire decisions of the Federal Court of Justice, where the court has taken the perspective, much of the obligations to the implementer. I can possibly share a little story which has been discussed before the Federal Court of Justice during this first Siswell-Hire hearing. The presiding judge, Meyer Beck, has compared the patent owner with an old lady, blind and deaf, running a grocery store on an island. And if a sailor comes and just takes the Coke, she can't do anything. She is helpless. And that is the gist which is driving still our judges. The patent owner needs our help, our court's help. This is an intangible asset, not like property and estate, but the patent is only a property if it is assisted by strong courts. This means then, in consequence, quick proceedings, full proceedings, not only PI proceedings, but 1 year to a full decision with full scrutiny, and also cheap proceedings with, I disagree, Otto, on one point. I think you have learned also a lot of the Germans with this written-based proceedings without discovery. We think first and then only take evidence. So that is...
So, Judge, any thoughts before I start firing away questions on what any of our colleagues here have said?
I'd just add that a growing element of this system is the ADR mechanisms. You mentioned mediation, but arbitration is the way a lot of competitors deal with large portfolio suits. They can choose the judges, they can choose the law, they can set a time limit, and that is very superior to alternatives.
Yeah. So, and without divulging any confidences, you know that firsthand, correct?
I do.
Yeah, and you've been an arbitrator in some of these cases. No, you don't have to tell us who, but they go on. They happen.
Yes, and this system works.
Yeah.
They have excellent representation, and at the end, you come up with a rate which is obeyed.
Yeah.
By the way, our Munich local court, district court in Munich, has decided that it would be a sign of unwillingness if the implementer would not submit to arbitration. Unfortunately, or funnily, we have never, I'm not aware of a big arbitration in Germany yet, but you see it many times now in the emails going between the clients and the negotiations, and yes, then in the last line. And by the way, I would also...
You know why you haven't seen it? It's happening in France.
Yeah, but you see the reaction. I mean, both sides, the patent owners and the implementers, are getting more prudent, and they are receiving the Munich, and then in the last line it always says, and by the way, I would also go to arbitration if you would agree. And
France or London. Those are the two European sites usually.
So now that Volkmar's took us to the unwilling licensee question, maybe we should start there. I mean, this is a conversation that I've wanted to have for a very long time, because while being identified probably most closely with the innovators, I'm not unsympathetic to the implementers' plight in all of this. I am completely unsympathetic to those who refuse to engage in a business appropriate way, because and I understand that these SSO agreements are not a contract that binds the implementers, but I do think the entire structure of the system is intended to work with two willing dance partners.
I'd amend that just a little. I think the system works very well, that people are reaching agreements. The problem's the one you mentioned earlier, and that is that there's an incentive to delay as long as possible reaching that agreement.
Right.
And that is harmful primarily to the innovator.
Yeah, and that's, I suppose that at the end of the day, we're not talking about a situation where the fruit company doesn't eventually pay. They will eventually pay. It's just by the time that they pay, it's pennies on the dollar compared to what I think was owed. It's late. It's required hundreds of millions. And no offense to you, my friends, who are making a good living because of stuff like this, but you have to chase these companies for a very, very long time. And I don't think that's the way that the system is set up to operate. So, I mean, one, feel free to disagree with me and tell me, I'm missing something here. And two, what does it mean in each of your jurisdictions to be willing or unwilling?
There's an interesting juxtaposition, and that is all of these competitors work together really well to create the standard at the SSO. But then when they go to the next step of evaluating the standard, we often have to bring litigation and arbitration into play.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with Judge Rader. The work that we do is really the exception. The rule is that business is done by the business people. We heard earlier today and yesterday, bright people that actually make this industry work. And then when parties are not able to reach an agreement, then you might have arbitration, you might have mediation, you might have third parties helping. When you get to us to seek an injunction on that national level, it's really the exception. It's because nothing worked.
So let me push back a little bit, and not that I disagree. I mean, obviously, you know the reality, but is it when you say it's the exception because the overwhelming number of times parties agree, or are we talking that it's the exception because the overwhelming dollar value gets negotiated in arm's length agreements? Because it's my understanding that the companies that are the hell no, and not until we have to, those are the ones that do the most business and pay the highest amounts. So that if they can push off paying today for 10 years, it just makes simple, good business decision based on the time value of money alone.
Gene, in the last 10 years, we had about 30 cases. That really depends. I don't think we can have established a rule for that. But those cases show that the majority of the business is actually done without the need of preliminary injunction or outside lawyers. One of the things that we always point to the judges in Brazil is the percentage of the market already licensed under the FRAND offer. And I have cases where we show to the Brazilian judge that 97% of all smartphones in Brazil are already licensed, but for one or two companies that we seek in the injunction. So the majority is licensed.
Okay, so is that, you see it the same, Carlos?
I mean, I see that. I mean, one thing I also see is that none of those parties that you allude to that can hang out and wait, and delay things. None of those are SMEs.
Right.
We're talking about big players, and many of those cases, the ones I've seen from the examples of auto that you've provided and globally, also have had a prior license. Right, and it's like renewal of the license, and in those particular cases, the waiting, the delaying is particularly, I think, useful. And there's a number of articles on the efficient infringement argument of waiting, and even if you're paying interest, right, it's just that delay in the game. And the hope isn't that you're going to get something cheaper. Many of the companies publish their rates. You know that's going to be the max, except for this very recent case. Sisvel, I think, was pretty cool, by the way, in the U.S. But the idea of just waiting it out makes sense because what you also see in negotiations is you're bogging it down and you're hoping that you're going to get a better price simply
Right.
by waiting it out, right? So, and if there's no going back to a preliminary injunction available, I think what you're also saying is there's no incentive to try and speed things up. And waiting, and one quarter goes by, and you tell your shareholders, "Hang on." Second quarter, "Hang on." Third quarter, "Yeah, we're just about to reach one." Fourth, people are like, "What happened?" And you see these huge drops. So, I think it makes sense to wait out if you're a big company, and I think some of those exceptions, I think you might be right. I haven't done the analysis, but.
Yeah, I mean, because what I've been told is the overwhelming number of deals don't require litigation. But the dollar value of those that do dwarf the deals that don't require litigation, and so that's why I asked the question, and I frankly don't know because I've literally heard both, from people who should know, and maybe it's tough. What say you, Paul?
May I have back the question? How do you see who is an unwilling licensee, right? I mean, this is
Sure.
the elephant in the room. When we started in 2015 after the Huawei CTE judgment, then everything changed. And patent files are already very thick. You have all the standards and the prior art, but then we started to create a second pile of paper covering all this negotiation story. Also at the court, they have separate files for the FRAND part, and we have sometimes different hearings only for FRAND. And in those first years, then I have asked the judges, do you have now everything you need to decide what happened there? And they firstly didn't understand my question. They said, "Hey, of course, I'm a judge. I can decide whatever you put before me." But then as time went by, they got a bad feeling. And nowadays they are saying, in principle, I like FRAND cases. I have to decide on what's happened there in the negotiations, but you are telling only half of the things to me. And that is the bad feeling what our judges sometimes have. Conversely, for the attorneys, I would say I can't give you a clear answer, and I must say here each case is different. But we get quite, and our judges nowadays get quite a good feeling on it. That's at least what I can say. We have seen many injunctions in Germany since Huawei ZTE, so that's still possible. And these have been cases where the judges went to the entire negotiation stories. You know them, sometimes 7 years or so. They have seen the phases in negotiations, the periods of silence, and there's some movement again. But this must be then judged by those guys at the end. And we as attorneys, we are in a position to translate it and really explain what happened, what was behind, what did they do. And I would say it's a creative act for us to interpret now a moving target, unfortunately also. So time matters. Yeah. And that's where we are. And we see unwilling licenses before the court, but we have also seen cases where it did not get to an injunction because they said, no, apparently here was a license willing implementer.
Okay. So have there been any cases that, where there's been a court that has found some party to be an unwilling licensee?
I recall Judge Essex giving us one of those opinions. I'm pointing at him because he's here in the audience. So I think at least there's been at the ITC some recorded instances of unwilling licensees.
Okay. So Judge Essex will be on the next panel for the ITC. We'll make sure we ask him about that then. But in your other countries, has that been an issue that's come up? Because I believe I have it corrected. That was squarely teed up as an issue in Apple versus Qualcomm, I think, and then the case settled before. I think it may have even been briefed, and then the case settled.
I mean, for Colombia, I think this is probably different for Brazil. One of the strategic decisions we took at the beginning was, are we going to bother providing the story, the unwilling licensee story, or are we going to treat this as a regular patent case? The decision we came to in Colombia, because we are very front-loaded for the preliminary injunction, was if we don't provide the unwilling licensee story, it's going to come back and bite us later on in litigation. It's going to look kind of squirrely that we didn't mention, something about the nature of these particular patents. So we provided the story, and in the case where we got a preliminary injunction, the first one that issued, there was definitely discussion as to the good faith and the willingness of, in that particular case, of Apple to participate. So a whole story behind what happened in the prior 2 negotiations for the license, how long it took, the fact that litigation took place. Last time it was 18 months. We had to wait. Those stories were the basis, in part, for the grant of the PI. There was some language in the judge's text for the grant saying Apple in this particular case has behaved in an as an unwilling licensee. So that was part of the story. But again, I have one data point. Right. Brazil's got more.
These data points don't exist that much, and I think it's wise for those parties that are pushing this longer for legitimate. And again, these are legitimate business reasons. If you can do this, you save money in the long run doing it. I think that's just the business economics of this. But it's my understanding that we don't have a lot of these because even when it's been alleged, you get settlements before a judge decides. But what say you, Otto?
In the last 10 years, we had 93% of PIs in the cases we filed. We never get to that.
So you treat it just like as a straight up patent infringement case?
No, we by now all the district judges in Brazil understand what a standard essential patent is very well, what FRAND commitment is, and we show the attempts to license. We show the other parties that are licensed. We showed that competitors of the defendants have taken a license. And the judges will, of course, entertain further discussions down as the case progresses, but we're able to settle in 1 year and 8 months in average.
Okay.
We never get to that.
Yeah.
So what we share in the beginning is good enough to get the PI.
Okay, so Judge Rader, I'd like to get your input here. As a jurist, how important do you think the story of whether the other party's been unwilling, aggressively unwilling, recalcitrant, whatever word you want to use, trying to come up with a spectrum of maybe a little unwilling to like really unwilling. I mean, how influential is that in your decision making?
I think it's very important, and it's quite easy to prove. You just point out when you first gave them notice and opened negotiations, and if that was 5 years ago, the story speaks for itself. And then that gives me an opening to also note that maybe the highest commendation for arbitration is confidentiality. All of this unseemly record can be off the record, and even more important, the final amounts can be off of the record, and nobody can afford to either win or lose $1 billion these days.
Right. So let me follow up the question on the arbitration issue. Have you had any like baseball arbitrations where, or sometimes I think whether it be baseball or high-low or whatever they're calling those types of creative things these days, like to say like, okay, here's the range of what a FRAND rate, all things being equal. I know we just had a panel saying there is no such thing as a rate, but so like, is there a window like I don't know, like 1% to 4 or 5% or whatever it may be, that the parties will agree it's got to be within this range, or how does this work? Or is it just like a straight arbitration with none of these creative rules?
I haven't had anything that gave me that kind of rules, although that's entirely within the ability of the parties to set those rules. Although in fact, the record will always have a low point and a high point presented, and the result will fall somewhere between.
Yeah, no, and I'm everybody argues for that, and I get that, but I guess one of the concerns that I hear about arbitration, and it is a concern. Except in the most extreme cases, there will be no appeal. So there's the nice part about, and particularly in a scenario like this, where at the end of the day, the innovators need the implementers, and the implementers need the innovators. There has to be a deal. There will be a deal in some range here eventually. And knowing that this can't be appealable, it would seem to me to create a little bit of a safety net for both parties to come in and say, well, we'll do the arbitration, but it's got to be in this range.
It's a good recommendation. I think one of the strengths of arbitration is that it gets you a result quickly, and business needs a decision, whatever it is, in a very timely manner so the market can move forward. And the additional benefit is it can be confidential, and you probably benefit from not having to wait for an appeal.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I mean, as a business owner myself, I think uncertainty is the kiss of death. You have to have certainty, because otherwise you don't know which path to pursue. But Volkmar, and I think in Germany, correct me if I'm wrong, that's where we have sort of the most well-developed set of rules, for lack of a better way of saying it, with respect to establishing that one is willing, right? The German judges require the implementers to go through a certain litany of things to demonstrate a willingness, correct?
Yes, but the litany was, I would say, Huawei TI. This was the European Court of Justice, where we had these all in 6 paragraphs. But since then, the parties became better, and the negotiation stories became more complex, and our judges became more wise also to judge. And in the cases which go to the court here, it's never black and white. This is really a spectrum of possibilities, and also then in the time scale, you can certainly in many cases, to be honest, you see an implementer 2 years completely unwilling, right? And then the innovator feels to have good reasons to file the complaint. But what happens then? This guy gets willing, at least for a certain. He sends meaningful letters. He makes even then an offer. The local court in Munich has decided 3 years ago. They put the focus a lot on the counter offer of the inventors, and the Munich court said, I do not continue reading once I have read that there is a counter offer on the table. It takes 3 months, and then nowadays all implementers put on the table a counter offer. There may be missing 1 or 2 zeros at the end of the figure. But that is then, again, what I want to say, that is then again to the judge to see, okay, now I have offer. Yes, you have read my judgment. But is this really enough for willingness? And then you see the sequence of emails, and this is the stuff.
Well, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. When I started my career, I did general litigation, and if you were asking for $100,000 is your initial demand, and then the defendant came back and said, oh, that's outrageous. You don't have any case, blah, blah, blah. We'll pay you $20,000. Okay, well, I immediately knew this is a case that's now going to settle. Because $20,000 is not nothing, and they know as well as I know that I didn't think we were going to get $100,000. That's why I started there, So both parties have suggested a willingness to get into and probably be closer to their number than our, the initial demand. That's just the way the game goes, And if you have two parties on both sides that understand the game, you can look at that first counter offer to say, is this a go to hell? I'll pay you $500 because that's double what it costs you to file the litigation.
You'd be a good mediator, Gene.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no.
You're using usually in mediation a double-blind system that tries to get to that point.
Right. No. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I think that all of this stuff is obviously very 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 fascinating. And there was another question that I had. This is another reason why I think that it's a mistake to go down the path of the route of the European Commission, because precisely what you were just saying, Volkmar, you had this very detailed litany of things that they're going to consider, and pretty quickly people figured out, okay, well that's the new sheriff in town. We have to follow those rules, and
that's
you
the
do.
playbook. Yeah,
and you don't need a big bureaucratic regime in order to do that. And Your Honor, our friend Judge Albright, he hasn't had a lot of transfers out of his court lately. I disagree with the activity that the Federal Circuit had in mandamus.
A lot of expertise there.
But there is now a well-understood path forward to keeping cases there based on considerations that the Federal Circuit won't touch. And that's the benefit of having a strong decision by a good judge that people understand now that this is the rule, so now we have to handle our own affairs. And I think that probably more than anything describes the successes from the patent owner's perspective in Colombia, Brazil, and Germany. And I don't think you need regulators to come in aggressively on top of that when the litigation system is actually allowed to operate and patents actually can be exclusive.
Well, and I think Otto made the point earlier that he's very often seen industries where over 90% are already licensed. So there's a lot of success that's happening without involving the government, and if governments get involved, that tends to cut short the negotiation and the ability to reach those agreements.
Well, it certainly puts the finger on the scale for somebody. And we don't always know who that somebody's going to be. But very rarely, in my experience, do you see the government get involved and it be equal pressure on both sides of the scale. Yeah. Now, that's the role of judges, right? Until the judge figures out, well, I think you're lying and I believe you. Okay, well, now I'm going to press down heavier on your side for those reasons. But I think that's the system that we want, because I think it leads to people being encouraged to do business outside of the courtroom. And in the U.S., we have exactly the opposite. But do you think, Otto, because I know you're very familiar with the U.S. system as well, I mean, do you think that that's the difference between the success of Brazil and your success in getting these injunctions, your success in bringing people to the table, the 97% that are otherwise licensing, is because of that, in some ways, a light touch, but a recognition that the patent is an exclusive asset.
Oh, most certainly. Just like Wokmar said, the patent is only as good as the rights that you have to make sure that you can exclude others when you need to do so. And you want to do business without having to get to the courts. But the suggestion that you are going to replace the right to exclude others through a court with an agency that does not represent the globe, that doesn't represent you, by the way, it represents only part of the world.
Right.
And it suggests...
And not even the entire EU.
And it's suggesting that can establish royalty in a global basis, and it's even suggesting that it might make a suggestion before a determination. Guess if, for instance, a national court outside Europe decides to get one of those suggestions and say, well, once the European Union agency has made a suggestion, I'm taking this suggestion into my national court system and issuing a global order. It will be that of the suggestion of the European Union agency. So we don't know where this is going to end. Most certainly we're going to have guidelines that will be established by an agency if it's ever created. So I think we're not going to in the right direction.
Yeah. Carlos, you look like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, no, I think it creates this imbalance. I completely agree with that whole regional. If you create something regionally, that's going to modify the natural balance, if you will, elsewhere. You know, I'm thinking China eventually will want to chime in, and you know, if they want to come up with something similar, I could see problems coming out of that. And I think there's this other issue, which I think some UPC judges have mentioned, that you know, this right to access, you know, to justice, right, to be able to litigate. If you start limiting in one country, that's very easy for that to permeate to other countries, either indirectly because they'll, hey, let's wait to see what the EU IPO has to say, or they want to create their own system. So I don't like the idea. Obviously, I'm a litigator, right? So I mean, I do have
hammer and nail.
Right.
When the world is a nail, you look like a hammer, and vice versa.
And I think being able to litigate your patent, and you know, we're just these countries right now, but you got 150, 100. You know, maybe some of the companies only get patents in 40, 30 countries. But I think those are always options, and these are global campaigns. You got to remember many times, and that are layered in time and in waves, and so that there's an expectation that you can always access the judicial system in different countries for the patents in those different countries.
Yeah.
So the two of you would be the beneficiaries if the EU regulation comes to place.
Well, I hadn't seen it from that point of view. Thank you. Maybe I'll write something.
Yeah. Well,
at least for this year gap.
Hey,
which we have.
I'll take a year.
So one of the questions that was asked in a previous panel, Judge Essex asked about. So why isn't anybody talking about the SSO agreements, the actual agreements that bind this? And we were running a little late, and I didn't want to throw in my 2 cents. I'll throw my 2 cents in now and see if I can get you guys to respond. It's not because it's irrelevant, because at some point in time it should be relevant based on the terms of the contract itself between the innovators and the SSOs. But something you just said brought it up. I mean, these are global portfolios. You know, you are not licensed, and this is another problem I have with what the EU is doing, because if the EU does and moves forward, then China's going to move forward, and the U.S. will move forward, and at least those three, maybe others are going to develop, and then we have a tripartite regime to navigate, right? And which one, depending upon where you're at, and it just is devoid of any vision or version of reality that fits the industry, because you license a global portfolio. You don't license the Chinese portfolio, the American portfolio, the EU portfolio. These are, you know, take it or not. Do you want the whole world, or do you not want the whole world? And so I think in these conversations that we're having, at least as a part of this event, we're assuming, because from a business perspective, I think this is what you do. You assume validity. You assume infringement, right? And then you see if you can work out a business deal that both sides can live with. Because if you can work out a business deal that both sides can live with, it doesn't matter whether these things are valid, because there will be at least one that is. It doesn't matter whether they're infringed, because there will be at least one that is. If the number is a number that I as an implementer can live with and you as an innovator can live with, that deal gets done 7 days a week and twice on Sunday, right? Am I wrong in looking at it that way? Judge?
No, the validity will not come up in a portfolio case because something is valid. Neither will essentiality. I hear complaints that essentiality is never fully examined. One of those patents in the portfolio is essential to the patent, so let's get on to the real issue of valuation.
And when we've talked about essentiality many times in many programs, many webinars, and it's not that it's not relevant. It can be when you're trying to reach a business deal. It can be a rat hole, and by that what I mean is it essential? Well, the one side said, well, I'm not using it. I practice the standard. I'm not using it. That doesn't mean it's not essential, because it may have been essential or may have appeared to have been essential at the time it was disclosed. So therefore, by definition, it's standard essential. And I think talking about essentiality, like some of these other issues, but that one even more so than validity infringement, I think causes parties to be ships passing in the night.
But the degree of essentiality in a portfolio should affect the valuation. So I would...
Agreed.
I think
And
there
quality.
should be some, and quality may be a way of stating the issue in one word. There ought to be some inquiry in every forum as to validity, essentiality, and infringement.
Okay. I don't think Carlos.
Yeah, and those, again, are difficult topics that people doing business and people in arbitration and mediation have to deal with. But when you get down to the preliminary injunction, we don't have those issues. We only sue on valid patents. We only sued in infringement claims.
You sound like Microsoft. We never infringe valid patents.
We only sued on claims
So
that
you're
cover
not suing on the whole portfolio. You'll pick just a patent or two.
You want me to sue with 400 patents?
The judge probably wouldn't like that.
Yeah. We sue on one patent. When we put 3 patents, the Brazilian
and you
judge
picked
complained.
the worst one, right?
See?
Yeah, no, you picked the best one.
So
and that's why I think, and I'm speaking as a business person, right? I mean, let's get rid of these issues that are distracting, and see, can we come to any kind of agreement? Because, Otto, you're going to pick the best, maybe not the best patent because you don't want to put it at risk, but it's going to be one of the best.
But licensing is a relationship. Litigation is a picture.
Yeah.
It's a picture because I have to get
Yeah.
the standard that is being implemented right now, and standards get updated sometimes twice a year. And I get the products that are in the market right now, and some companies, just like fashion, they come with 2 or 3 smartphones per year. But litigation is a picture. Licensing is a relationship. It takes many different standards. It takes many versions of the standards. It takes many products throughout the years. But litigation will be a picture of that specific
And
moment.
part of the key might be to protect your relationship as you go through litigation, which argues for confidentiality again.
So, Carlos, go ahead. You
I
want
was
to
just
say?
thinking, I think it's important to distinguish between, and this is why many companies, the folks are in 2 different areas, right? You have the licensing team, and then there's the enforcement team, the assertion team. And I think it's important to be able to distinguish the two, because once you're into litigation, there are new rules, and both sides should know that. This is, this is the muscle panel, right? This is different from the other panels. I was like, we're going to be different. The rules here are different. The rules depend on each jurisdiction. And when you talk to the assertion team, this is a whole different strategy versus the license. Obviously, they're speaking to each other. But once you get into this part, there should be some, I think there's a little bit of mutually assured destruction by the time you hit the assertion side of stuff. You know you're going to lose some patents in certain jurisdictions. There's certain jurisdictions that will be quicker and faster for a PI. This is part of a different game. I would always,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I always tell people you do not hire a patent litigator because they play nice with others. The opportunity to play nice with others has long since ceased by the time the complaint is filed.
Right.
Now, if they have a come to Jesus moment and you want to play nice, call a timeout, have a ceasefire, hire Judge Rader as a mediator and see if we can, after we've done some bit of lifting, dial it back and get a business resolution. But if we don't get a business resolution there, then we're back to unleashing the dog off the collar, to use a dog analogy like I always like to do as the IP watchdog,
Yeah.
But you don't hire litigators because they play nice.
Right.
You hire them because they know what they're doing and they fight well and they, within the rules, they fight for their clients.
Right.
So, Volkmark, we're going to start to wind up here. So, any final thoughts for the audience? What do you hope they remember?
Yeah, maybe the headline was international litigation strategies. I think now putting us in the shoes of the patent owners, which is quite easy for us, the future must be a collaboration between us in orchestrating the litigation such that really the others do have a reason to come to the table. And that's all what we are doing. Nobody of us really wants a judgment. Nobody wants an injunction, but we want to bring them on the table in order to get the FRAND deals done. And that can be done if you are combining the advantages of the different jurisdictions. For instance, and maybe I stop with one problematic issue which we have seen in Germany. This is the restricted territorial scope. Oppo has left the market, and I had sued TCL for the Alcatel phones. They have left the German market. So apparently the old, good old schematics that you sue in Germany and you just take this as an exemplary for at least Europe, if not the world, does not work anymore in all cases. So we need assistance worldwide, and we should then work together there.
Great, thank you very much.
UPC, by the way, would also be one solution, which we have now, but your jurisdiction's always welcome to assist.
Yeah, we're going to be doing more with the UPC. Actually, we're going to be hosting a judge from the UPC here in December 12th, for a program that we're going to be putting together. More information to follow. So very exciting times in Europe. Thank you so much for being here. Carlos, we'll go to you next. What's your final thought for the audience?
I think folks are getting creative as to where they're asserting their patents. If you get to the position where you need to litigate, I'm personally selling Colombia basically as a jurisdiction. Had a lot of meetings with, how much of my portfolio do I need to have in Colombia? How much should I ramp up in prosecution? Colombia is not a typical jurisdiction you file in. Most companies don't bother filing in Colombia. So that's a big part of the discussion. But the fact that I'm having that conversation, which I didn't have 2 years ago, I think sends the message people are really interested in broadening their options. UPC obviously put a new nice formula on the table, but I'm still having conversations, and I'm hopefully, won't be a one-hit wonder by next year. I'm trying to get,
I hope not, because during our patent prosecution program, I was telling them about Colombia and people, the chief patent counsel, chief IP counsel. I could see the light bulbs go off. You need to file in jurisdictions that are favorable.
Right, and so I think it's just opening your eyes to it, the possibility, and the fact it's working, and we're very aggressive. Just going to how many patents we select in Colombia, I've used 10, 14 patents, not in a single complaint, but you have a whole bunch of salvos, torpedoes in the water, so it can get quite aggressive real quick, and that's why having a positive result at a preliminary injunction early on, I think helps the parties again, because it's just annoying as heck to not be able to sell your product. Even if if you do decide to pull out of the country, that's that's a business decision, but that means something in any case. I think that's pressure.
Yeah. Otto, your final thought.
Well, again, this is an industry where we all seek to have companies reach an agreement early on by themselves or with the assistance of mediation or arbitration. But if that's not a possibility, Brazil, since I think GSM was the first standard that we have litigated in the turn of the century. We have a system that proves to be reliable, fast. We have never lost a single patent throughout those years. Killing a patent in Brazil is pretty difficult. Getting a preliminary injunction is fast, and it helps in reaching global settlements. We have never settled with a local license in Brazil. We have always settled where clients were able to get the unwilling licensee to sign in the FRAND offer.
And that's why you see U.S. companies fighting on both sides of the V down in Brazil, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you don't see them litigating here like they used to do in the 90s when Judge Rader was in the court, is that sends a message that maybe you should look again into improving your current system.
From your lips to God's ears. Thank you, Otto. And Judge Rader, I'll give you the final word here, your parting thoughts.
I think what we've seen here, that our objective of that early favorable settlement has a lot of pathways that might get you there. We've seen 3 excellent alternatives here. ADR may be still another one with arbitration and mediation, but I think a careful plan in advance to reach your goal will suggest you take more than one path.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate it.